You don't look the gifted fox between the tails. Chapter 6, Funali. Sonic cried, spasms of tears shaking his body. He held Tails close, hugging his younger brother as his tears wetted the fox's fur. Tails, not his body. He refused to call it as such. That would mean...
I promised?
He cried.
I promised I'll keep him safe, Knux. And I failed him. It's all my fault. I'm no hero. I should have never involved him in this.
He thought as Tails grew colder in his hold.
He must have used what's left of his energy to save you,
Knuckles said, head hung low.
Dad?
Sonic suddenly whispered, eyes going wide. He looked up at Knuckles, horror visible in his green irises.
Knuckles, what are we going to tell them? How are we even?
He hiccuped as he hugged Tails tightly.
We promised we'd all come back, but Tails is?
I don't know.
The Echidna shook his head sadly.
If only, wait, the Master Emerald.
He exclaimed suddenly.
Maybe it can restore his energy.
He's dead? Knuckles.
Sonic yelled. His eyes widened and he froze, as if him saying the words aloud finally made him realize the seriousness of the situation. His breath hitched. Tears appeared in his eyes.
He's dead. What good would restoring his energy do if he's...
He broke down again, chewing through the forest. The Echidna waited for a while, until the hedgehog calmed down enough for him to continue.
Energy is life.
Knuckles explained slowly.
If we restore enough of it, we might be able to bring him back.
Sonic froze, red-rimmed eyes staring at the red-willed Mobian. There was something akin to an almost feral desperation in his green eyes.
Really?
His voice was hoarse. Knuckles could sense a hint of hope in the way the hedgehog spoke.
I cannot promise it will work,
he replied truthfully. He saw Sonic's ears go flat and eyes dull, so he added quickly.
But I heard the legends of such occurrences, and I was taught there's always some truth to the legends.
What do we do?
Sonic grabbed his hand, looking so desperate Knuckles could barely believe this was the same hedgehog he fought against. He appeared to be a mere shadow of the hyperactive and strong Mobian he got to know during their short time together.
We need to find the Master Emerald, and fast.
Knuckles explained, shaking away the wrongness of the situation.
The longer he stays like this, the lower chance for it to work.
Oh no, it must still be in the airship.
Sonic remembered.
We won't find it in time. I can run fast enough to get there, but I'd still have to slow down and search the ship at a normal speed.
We won't have to.
The Echidna said confidently, straightening up. He closed his palms and eyes, his brows furrowed. Suddenly, a green light started to seep through his fingers. He opened his hands, and the Master Emerald lay between them, shining bright and warm.
How did you do that?
Sonic's eyes were wide in shock.
My tribe has a special connection to the Master Emerald,
Knuckles explained, staring down at the stone in his hand.
We can call upon it, and if not hidden from us, it will answer.
He looked at Tails, and slowly lowered himself next to the fox. Then, with a calming breath, he gently set the emerald on his chest. At first, nothing happened. The two looked at each other, hope disappearing from Sonic's eyes. Suddenly, the Master Emerald glowed brighter, its maggot twirling around Tails' body. Starting from his twin tails, the vibrant color slowly returned to his fur. When the tips of his ears turned back their original color, the emerald stopped glowing. Knuckles took it as his cue, and picked up the stone. With relieved sighs, they watched Tails' chest start moving again, the slow rise and fall oddly comforting. Then, the fox stirred and slowly opened his eyes.
Hey guys, what did I miss?
Tails whispered tiredly. He was startled by Sonic scooping him up and pulling him into a hug.
Sonic, are you crying?
Tails questioned, confused. The hedgehog didn't reply, shaking his head instead. Knuckles put his hand on Tails' shoulder.
Good to have you back, kid.
He said, the fox smiling back at him. His eyes widened, memories suddenly coming back to him. The abduction, the metal arms, the machine, the pain, Robotnik almost throwing Sonic off the ship, his desperate struggle to get to him in time, to save him, and then, nothing. He hiccuped, his hands gripping Sonic's fur and burying his hand in his shoulder. He felt his own tears wetting the hedgehog, but he didn't rake, letting himself melt in the warm embrace.
Sonic.
They heard Tom call out, running from between the trees, Maddie right behind him.
Knuckles. How's... Alright. Knuckles, how's you're alright.
Madison slid down to her knees and pulled all three of them into a bone-crushing hug.
We were so worried about you.
She said, crying.
We saw the airship fall in.
She pulled away and stared at them.
Now, be honest, are you hurt?
She asked, frowning at them.
Only a few scratches and cuts, nothing life threatening.
Knuckles replied. The woman nodded and turned her gaze at the hedgehog.
Same, I swear.
Sonic raised his hands in defense. Madison leveled him with a glare, fully intended on checking it up herself, but that was for later. She finally turned to the last of the three. She could already see the multiple cuts and bruises. There were marks on his wrists and ankles, patches of irritated skin visible under the fur. She could only imagine what must have left those marks, and her blood boiled at the thought. Tails shrunk under her gaze, hiding behind his twin tails. She shook her head and forced herself to calm down.
Tails, is there anything else except from what I can see?
She asked softly. The fox ran a hand through his twin tails, a gesture that seemed to comfort him.
Well, I'm just generally tired.
He said in a quiet voice, his ears flat against his head.
My throat is sore, and I think I should be hungry, given the last thing I had eaten was the beef stew they made us as a reward for winning the dance competition.
That was 4 days ago.
Sonic exclaimed in shock.
Guess I'd have to file a complaint about the maintenance board to Dr. Ruinek.
Tails joked half-heartedly. Madison nodded.
Okay, let's go home and get you all patched up.
Tails pushed himself up and his vision tilted. He swayed and fell forward, blacking out to the concerned cries from his friends. In hindsight, they should have expected it, yet they were all terrified when Tails suddenly passed out shortly after standing up. Madison was the first one to check on the unconscious fox, noting with a relieved sigh that he was still breathing. Now, when she was closer, she could see how skinny he looked, unlike she remembered from their first meeting.
He's just passed out, but he needs help and fast.
She said out loud.
We need to get him back somewhere I can tend to him properly.
Sonic nodded, before pulling out a ring and throwing it. The portal opened and they all stepped through, Tom carrying unconscious Tails. Once back home, Madison took a deep breath and turned to everyone.
All right, I'm going to drive to the clinic and borrow an IV.
She announced, already picking up the car keys.
He is severely malnourished and we can't wait until he wakes up to take care of that. And I want him here, where we all can look after him, even when we
She pointed at herself and Tom.
Are at work.
Plus, I think it would be better for him to wake up with people he knows.
Her husband added, and she nodded in agreement.
It should take me around half an hour to get there and back.
Madison continued as she headed for the door.
In the meantime, I want you to organize a place for him to rest and with enough space to set an IV next to.
Yes, ma'am.
Sonic replied as the others nodded. An hour later, Tails was laying in the folding bed Tom brought out from the garage. They put it in the guest room at the end of the corridor. Sonic wanted to put it in his room, in the attic, but Tom explained the guest room is easier and accessible, so he conceded. An IV was set up near the bed, its needle attached to the fox arm. The liquid inside was slowly dripping down, providing the so-needed malnourishment. Madison put her hands on her hips as she observed the temporary clinic. She nodded in approval and exited the room. Leaving the door open, she moved to the kitchen, put on her apron and turned on the stove. Soon, the smell of food filled the house and brought its occupants.
Dinner is almost ready.
Maddie said from where she mixed inside the pan with a spatula.
Set the table, boys.
I'm not hungry.
Sonic murmured, thinking of Tails sleeping just down the hall.
Food is the greatest remedy.
The woman countered, pointing her saucy spatula at the hedgehog.
And I don't want any of you going hungry while Tails is recovering.
Sonic flinched at the words, but obediently helped to set the table and sat down in his place. The dinner was silent, everyone's thoughts occupied by the same thing. When he went to sleep that night, Knuckles sleeping in his own bed on the other side of the room, Sonic wondered just how much longer they would have to wait for Tails to wake up. It's already been 2 weeks since they came back from Equator, but there seemed to be no progress in Tails' recovery. Despite Madison's claims that the fox was fine, just needed time for his body to regain enough strength, Sonic couldn't help but be worried. He spent most of his days by his little brother's bedside, leaving only for meals, and when Maddie insisted he go and stretch his legs, he would have spent the nights there as well, if it wasn't for Tom, who practically dragged the barely awake hedgehog up the stairs and into his own bed. He was in the guest room again, watching passively as the IV liquid dropped down the tube and into Tails' vein. His eyes were dropping and he could feel his consciousness slipping away, but he forced himself to stay awake. He was the only one in the house right now, both Tom and Maddie being at work and Knuckles out in the forest, probably punching away his frustration. If something happened, he had to be conscious. His eyes closed and his head dropped, startling him awake. He didn't sleep well last night, plagued by constant nightmares. Robotnik using up all of Tails' energy before Knuckles freed himself, Tails falling off the ship and Sonic failing to catch him. The Master Emerald not responding to Knuckles or not doing anything to restore Tails' energy. Tails dying before he could wake up from his coma. On and on it went, torturing his mind with every possible bad scenario. When he was woken up by yet another nightmare, Sonic finally gave up sleeping for that night. He grabbed something to eat from the kitchen and retreated to the guest room, watching the sleeping fox ever since. His head dropped again and before he knew it, he was soundly asleep, head on the edge of bed covers. He didn't know how long he was sleeping, minutes, hours, it didn't matter. He woke up the moment he felt Tails staring, shooting up from the chair he was sitting on.
Tails.
He asked Worley, observing the sleeping fox. He didn't get any reply, and for a second he thought he imagined it. When Tails stirred again, his eyes slowly fluttered open and he turned his unfocused gaze around the room. It finally settled on Sonic, and he blinked a couple of times, seemingly confused.
Sonic, what happened?
He asked, his voice hoarse. He tried to sit up, only for his arm buckle under him and flopping back on the pillows.
Is he there, Betty?
Sonic reached out to him worriedly.
How do you feel?
Sir,
Tails replied, staring at the ceiling.
but better than the last time.
He turned his head to look at the hedgehog.
Where am I?
The Wetchuska's house.
Sonic explained.
We took you back when you passed out.
Tails' mouth shaped into an O as he processed the information.
How long was I?
He asked and Sonic slumped.
2 weeks.
He answered tightly, his fists clenching.
We were worried about you. Maddie had to plug you into an IV to make sure you have enough nourishment.
He pointed at the drips standing by the bed. Tails followed the tube all the way to his arm and flinched at the sight of the needle. He shivered and looked away. The main door opened and closed, startling the two. Tails' ears twitch, listening to whoever just entered the house.
Goodness, what a day.
Madison's voice sounded from the hall. They heard the jingle of the keys being put down and her feet shuffling through the corridor.
How is our little Earwig?
She exclaimed in shock upon walking inside the room and seeing Tails looking back at her.
Hello.
He smiled slightly and raised one hand in an embarrassed greeting.
You must be Mrs. Wachowska. It's nice to meet you properly.
Madison.
She corrected.
But Maddie is fine. How are you feeling?
Still a little tired, but much better.
The fox replied truthfully.
Thank you for taking care of me.
Of course, you were Sonic's friend, practically a member of the family.
She waved him off. Tails froze at the phrasing. Maddie noticed that and smiled softly.
You can have a family here, Tails.
Maddie said, putting her hand on his own.
If you want, of course. I know a certain someone would want you to.
She added, winking at the blue hedgehog.
I love that.
The fox replied, smiling.
It's been some time since I had someone I could call that.
He said, gripping the edge of the covers.
Well, you do now.
Maddie leaned over and kissed his forehead.
Just wait until your first official movie night. You are going to love it.
That sounds nice.
Tails agreed softly.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the family, buddy.
Sonic cheered, doing several spins around the room. Tails chuckled at the antics. As he waited for Madison to unplug the IV and clean the needle wound, he felt a certain warmth he didn't feel for a very long time. It was good to be home.